Hey there guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're kinda gonna talk about the whole mess that is happening in the world, mainly about what we are all afraid of, and that would be the Third World War, which is kinda scary to think about now that we have nuclear weapons and it is the weapon of mass destruction, but is also going to destroy the living conditions for the foreseeable future. So, kind of now looking at something, what could spike the Third World War, and its main problem is basically the US, as usual, just trying to provoke Russia in any way possible. And they're kind of starting to do that. I mean, they were doing this for a very long time with Ukraine by sending them weapons and training troops and all the naughty stuff that they are kind of not supposed to do. But also, I'm not defending Russia by any means, because Russia did this whole special military operation. They didn't declare war. I mean, they did recently, but I'm just talking about the what happened in the beginning. So we have here. So when you search, when did Russia declare war on Ukraine in 2024? You would see that it says on Wikipedia on February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine as a major escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian War, which started in 2014. So they've been fighting since 2014, but there was never a declaration of war, which is kind of modern day thing that they kind of like to do, like Israel and Iran and everybody else around Israel that gets hit by missiles and bombs and drones by Israel, but it's never a war. We just hit each other a little bit and it's all fine. So that's what was happening in Ukraine as well. But now we have, if you search when did Russia officially declare war in Ukraine, on Ukraine, that would be March 22nd this year. So they actually scratched special military operation and they moved it to full-scale war. So why is this so important? Why even bother declaring war if you didn't declare it all this time? And what does this change? Well, I found a good map that shows, as you can see, all the countries very well, and we can play around, zoom in, zoom out, and all the good stuff. So at first they started a special military operation. This big thing is Russia, this way smaller thing is Ukraine. So when they started the special military operation, their plan was basically enter Ukraine, go to Kiev, which is right here, and change the regime. Because obviously, if you have a regime in a apparently neutral country that keeps arming and hitting you with those arms, well, you kind of want to just remove the people in charge. Their plan was not destroying Ukraine or killing as many Ukrainians as possible. It was just change the current government so it remains a neutral country that doesn't want to join NATO, that doesn't want to join the whole chaos, and so NATO can bring, well, NATO weapons to Ukraine that will be closer to Russia, obviously. So these NATO countries already planned for this to happen, obviously, and they did send a bunch of weapons. They did train their troops, and Russia didn't declare war because obviously they thought it would be done within a week, which was kind of planned, week or two, and it would work, but they were kind of too late. But nevertheless, they were prepared. They retreated from Ukraine once they saw that Ukraine is well armed now. And they formed a front line and started pushing like you do in real war. But they didn't declare war till this year. So it took them 2 years to actually declare war since the real fighting started. And that is kind of weird because they kept getting weapons and training and everything they could possibly need. Even the communication from the Starlink that Elon Musk gave them, that was all something that Russia couldn't just remove. Because if it was Ukraine on its own, Russians would just hit the communication towers or whatever, and they would disrupt everything. Like, it's very easy for Russia to beat Ukraine, but they decided to not declare war. So listening to some of the Russian generals and to some of the people that are close to the Russian generals, I kind of realized, and they were openly saying this, the only thing that the West is not getting is that they are blatantly ignoring them. They don't want to hear any of their stuff because they're, what you gonna do? Like, I don't want to hear those stupid Russians say anything. Like, you should listen because they're saying this in the open. So they didn't declare war simply because if they declare war and it's the state of war, everybody who helps Ukraine especially by giving them weapons or train their troops like they did in Poland, Germany, France, UK, and then sending them to Ukraine to fight, that would be an act of war because you're helping a little bit too much to this country that is at war with you. But if it's a special military operation, which I really don't know by what law, international law, is that supposed to be legal, then, you're doing something illegal, I'm doing something illegal, so we're fine in between. So they didn't declare war because they liked the way, I'm talking about Russians, they liked the way the West was basically cutting off their own legs. That's what they were doing. So Ukraine doesn't really have a massive population, but it's good enough for the war to keep going for a while. And you can clearly tell that the US had a massive influence in all of this by making NATO countries send Ukraine a lot of military equipment. Now, that equipment didn't come out of thin air. It was basically pulled out of the Germany's, Polish, French, UK's military reserve equipment, and eventually probably sent from some active service type of equipment like vehicles and stuff. So NATO was reducing their own military strength by strengthening Ukraine, by giving them more weapons. Now, if this was a war at the time, this wouldn't be possible because that would be an act of war, and Russia, by international law, would be basically legal for them to strike these countries, NATO countries, to just send them a missile or two as a warning. But in this case, they didn't do anything, and it was weird. Why didn't they just declare war So these countries would stop sending weapons to Ukraine so they could win. And the reason was simply because the West was collapsing because how much money and weapons they were sending to Ukraine. And Ukraine wasn't really that effective by to utilize all these things correctly. Now, Ukraine didn't ever had a significant air force compared to Russia that does have it. And the entire war, Russia basically had the whole air supremacy locked down. Like they're really just, there are no Ukrainian planes. And that is why it's kind of laughable when you see these countries saying they're gonna send F-16s or some sort of like, we're gonna send like 10 planes to Ukraine. What are 10 planes gonna do? That is just idiotic. That's not gonna do anything. But what is that doing is making NATO countries give their weapons away, and then there is this threat, oh, Russia will continue attacking countries in Europe and you need more weapons. So all of these European countries now that have weakened their own military equipment reserves, they have to buy new weapons. And guess who are they buying them from? Well, it's the same people that told them to give the weapons away. So it's clearly the whole war is for profit for somebody. And let me show you why did Russia not declare war in such a long time. So all the weapons, even from the US, were shipped mainly in Germany. From Germany were moved to Poland, and from Poland are sent to Ukraine, which are then moved through all of this Western Ukraine to the Kiev. And from the Kiev was sent to the front. Now, most of the equipment went to Kiev, and there was some equipment sent from Romania as well that went to Kiev, and everything goes to Kiev. So with Russia that controls the whole airspace over the Ukraine, really just didn't have any problems bombing the whole Ukraine. Still doesn't. They could bomb all the way to Romania or to Hungary. They don't have a problem with this. They have missiles that can hit US, which is on the other side of the world, but why wouldn't you think they cannot hit inside of Ukraine? So these weapons, moving mainly on trains, were going from Poland to Kiev. Now, Russians knew this because this was very publicly being said. So Russians were kind of bombing these trains that were going from Poland to Kiev. So most of the equipment they destroyed didn't even reach Kiev. This is where the whole thing went like when Americans said, well, we sent this much equipment and this much equipment made it to the front. So somebody's probably corrupt and they're stealing equipment. So we're going to send somebody to check boxes, to see what's there. Well, because most of it was destroyed because it went to Kiev. Before it went to Kiev. It's really obvious, but they're being silent about it. They're not saying it. The West is not saying it. The Russians are saying it very proudly. They've been destroying equipment that's coming to Kiev, and then they were destroying equipment that's going from the Kiev on the front lines, which, once again, most of equipment doesn't even get to front lines. So this was one thing that was happening. The other thing that was really hurting Russia was these Western countries were training Ukrainian population, Ukrainian forces with the equipment they're about to send them, and they were training them safely in the Western countries like Germany, France, UK, Poland. And that was kind of weird because if let's say Russia declares Ukrainians as terrorists and you're training them, you're training terrorists and then you're training them away from everybody. And then you're sending them to fight over there. Like, if you want to train their troops, train them in Ukraine. Why move them away safely? Well, it's obvious because Russia can blow up those training camps very easily. But this way they're kind of protected. But this is still not war. But now, when you search, when did Russia officially declare war? It was on March 22nd. So that means that Russia declared war very openly and officially, which means now all the actions by the West to help Ukraine would be an act of war, and Russia would be legally capable of striking these countries. Now, this is a bad thing because this would spike the World War III, for example, if Germany sent something, or let's say France, as they said that they are considering when, not if, but when they will move their troops to Ukraine. This would be a clear act of war, and if Russia would strike France would be like, oh, we are under attack, we're bringing the whole NATO into this war, and here we go, everything goes to crap. But I don't know, because now that Russia declared war, now you can still see equipment going to Ukraine. You can still see France trying to move their troops there. Poland as well. Poland has been there for quite a while. A lot of, over 100,000 Polish people, Polish army people kind of died in Ukraine because they're holding their front lines, because Ukraine is obviously, and expected by everybody with two brain cells, running out of manpower because they do not have the population to fight this war. Which the secretary of NATO that is pushing this war should really know, or should get fired or even arrested for just... He keeps saying that Ukraine can win this war and we have to send them more money, we have to send them more weapons, and they can win this war. Now I want you to look at the map and tell me, how do you think Ukraine that is this small can create a front line like this across the entire Russia and just push? Because I am 100% sure they would not surrender until they lost Vladivostok over here. They would literally not surrender because the Russians are very resilient people if you looked at history books. So they cannot form the massive front line and push back. And even if they could, let's say Ukraine just spawns out of thin air about 2 million soldiers or 8 million. That's how many you would need for the Russian war. They still don't have nuclear weapons. Russia does. Non-nuclear power can never beat the nuclear power. If this was a war that Russia would see as war against NATO, for example, they would simply not even put any troops on the border. They would just say, as soon as you fire one shot, we fire like 7 missiles and bye-bye goes Ukraine. It's that simple. You cannot win the war against Russia. But Antony Blinken kept saying, we can win. I mean, they can win, which is, I don't know how. So, President of Ukraine, Zelensky, proposed a victory plan. So Zelensky presents victory plan to Ukrainian parliament, and then he kind of went to present it to the NATO. And I was really like curious, like how because I personally don't see any way Ukraine can win this war, and here's Zelensky holding something so ridiculous that I was really curious, like, is he an actual military genius that he can pull this off? Because I don't see how. And I was like, I can't wait to hear what it is. What was his plan? So he presented a victory plan that was laughable even to the NATO. His whole plan in short terms would be, we want to join NATO and bring NATO into the war, and we win the war with NATO directly involved in the war. And NATO is clearly not stupid, because they know if they enter the war, nuclear war is going to happen 100%. So NATO kind of just dismissed this. They're like, we're really glad and happy that Zelensky has this plan, but he kind of has to make it a bit more clear, which obviously means, how do we not die to the nuclear bombs? And he doesn't have that in plan. Nobody does, especially as Russia has these hypersonic missiles that really cannot be stopped. So you can't just go to war with Russia. You have to make some other plans, and these plans that Zelensky is making don't make any sense. So NATO kind of just dismissed his plan, especially because they told him, and they openly said, that they will not let Ukraine join NATO until the war in Russia is over. And not only until it's over, but they said they would let Ukraine only when Ukraine, or after Ukraine, wins the war. Which is impossible. Like, you can't do that, so you're not really joining NATO, you're just being used by NATO at this time. And I don't know if Ukraine doesn't realize that, or what it is, but they keep fighting, which is very strange to me. So, is there gonna be a World War III? Well, if we look at any war at this new age being fought for, it's mainly money. Because let's get serious here, Russia is the biggest country in the world, and majority of it is not even being used, is untouched, so they don't really need more territory to expand. There is simply no need for it, so the whole propaganda by the West that Russia will keep pushing through Europe unprovoked is complete nonsense. And since the war is being fought for the money, well, military industrial complex is really making a lot, because they're melting weapons in Ukraine, and they get to sell more weapons to the world, and they really like that. So they're making money off of this, and they will keep this war going. Not only this one, the war in Israel is also gonna be going. And it's a small war so far, but if we look at Israel right here, they're this tiny little country that is bombing Syria, hitting Lebanon, doing in Gaza complete nonsense, and hitting Iran. They kind of hit something in Iraq as well, I'm pretty sure, and they're kind of looking at Turkey. Still not doing anything, but they're looking, just checking it out. So Iran kind of said that they would retaliate if Israel again launched some sort of attack on them, and Israel very stupidly did that. So Iran is most likely going to retaliate once again and actually declare war, as they kind of today, I think, uh, stopped all flights. There is no fly zone over Iran, with all their airports are shut down, which means they're preparing for something massive and they will retaliate to Israel no matter what. Now, US said that in case of Israeli and Iranian war, they would not help Israel directly. They would not enter the war against Iran. But US is also not directly involved in Ukraine, but still they're controlling the whole thing. So the same thing is going to happen with Israel. They're going to be sending a lot of weapons, a lot of money to them, as they already are. And they would make it possible for Israel to beat... Not to beat, because they cannot. Like, come on, look at Israel. It's a tiny little country. If they want to beat Iran, they would need to do a full-scale invasion. So they would have to make a front line that would stretch a lot. And Israeli army is tiny for something this big. So this is not gonna happen. They cannot beat Iran. Yes, Israel has nuclear weapons, but those nuclear weapons are very much controlled by the US, just like the whole weapons that are given to Ukraine are controlled by the US and by NATO, which is basically them telling them, here are some rockets. Those rockets can fly directly to Moscow, but we're telling you, you can only use them inside of Ukraine. Don't hit Russia. Like, you gave them weapons, let them shoot them. Like, why not let them use them? Because Russia told them, don't hit our motherland, and we're not gonna hit Washington. Basically what they did. So yeah, the wars are very controlled. They are being really careful who does what, but they are not... I mean, nobody would benefit from the nuclear war. That, let's be clear. So nobody's gonna benefit from that. So they're just trying to do these proxy wars, and this is gonna be more often. It's gonna be happening more often because it's profitable. People die, we make money. People use weapons, we sell them weapons, we make money. But if there is a nuclear war, we all die and nobody makes money. So they're gonna avoid nuclear war with Russia, and not only Russia, because let's be serious here. NATO is struggling against Russia on its own. And Russia is not that powerful. Russia was powerful at the time, but right now, they're not really that powerful. Their population dropped significantly after the World War II, so they're not that powerful. They don't even have half a population that only US has, which they can't do a lot. They are kind of relying on their nukes, and they're threatening with those. But that is also kind of how far will Russia go with their nukes? Because they keep saying you can't do that to the West or we're gonna use nukes. So they could basically say, Ukraine is ours, if you don't give it to us, we will use nukes. Tomorrow they'll say Romania is ours, if you don't give it to us, we will use nukes. So there has to be a line of some sort that can't be crossed by both sides. So they probably have some sort of arrangement that they're kind of, supporting each other, and the wars are very controlled. So I wouldn't be afraid of the Third World War. The only thing I'm afraid of is this little big country called China. because China has so far been very passive. They're very, as they usually are, very calm, very precise, very calculated. And considering that NATO is struggling only with Russia, that is not that strong, that China is like 3 times stronger than Russia, and they are not having great relations with China, I am just afraid of China. Because if China activates, well, they're a communist state, communist country, and they're kind of, I don't want to say ruthless, but they do what they say. Because Russia said, well, if you send any type of nuclear weapons to Ukraine, we are gonna, hit London and Washington. And UK did send uranium enriched tank shells to Ukraine, which is basically a nuclear weapon of some sort that is spreading radiation, and it's illegal to use even by the NATO standards, but they use it because, it's in Ukraine, so why not? If it hits Russia, then it's illegal. If it hits us, that's illegal. Do as I say, not as I do. The main Western policy here. So if they're struggling that much in Russia, I can't even imagine what would happen if China got involved in any way. And just to give you an idea how dangerous China is, if you go around your house and pick up any item you can find, like your phone, your TV remote, you bought something, let's say a wallet, whatever you can find around your house, just look at the manufacturing country where that came from. And you will realize that a lot of your things are made in China. So imagine a war happens now in China. China decides to launch the invasion, I'm gonna say random shit here, launches an invasion of Mongolia for no reason. Just they wake up tomorrow and they're like, you know what, I wanna go be closer to Russia for some reason. And the country you're living in, which is most likely the Western country, would have to do the same thing they did to Russia and just impose sanctions because that's the only thing they know how to do. So they impose, let's say, North Korean type of sanctions to the China. Now look at all of those items around your house that are made in China and just imagine them disappearing. No more of that. And you will realize, god damn, I don't know how I'm gonna live anymore. You're gonna go back to the Stone Age very quickly. Because China was smart. Like China, you clearly know that whatever you buy from China is very poorly made. It is cheap, so you can buy a lot of it. And in the end, is still worth buying Chinese goods. But they're kind of smart because China is for their own use in China. They're making really high quality stuff, but everything they're exporting is being made very poorly. You can still manage to use all those items for years if you take really good care of them. But if you're anywhere from the West, you're very non-caring about whatever you have. You have a phone, you just drop it. You can't do that with Chinese goods. And they're making them kind of poorly on purpose so they can sell it cheaper, so you would buy it, and also so you would break it and have to buy another one. So you're really reliant on China. So if China does something and your country sanctions China, well, you're screwed. So China has a massive power. You cannot sanction them, and you hope to God they don't sanction you. So China is very much extremely powerful and so far very calm. So I wouldn't be worried about World War III unless something happens to China. Really wouldn't worry about it. Whatever happens in Iran, in Israel, in Ukraine, in Russia, it's all nonsense. It's all controlled, it's all for the money. But China is not all for the money. They don't profit from wars, they profit from trade and peace. That's why they made a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia that are right here. These two countries were in conflict for who knows how many years, and China came in and told them, you two figure stuff out and calm down, no more war. They signed a pact, I think it was last year or something, and recently they like really put a mark on it. They're all good. And China is trying to make these peace deals around the world to make peace so the trade could increase. It even rhymes. And they're really just trying to sell as many things as possible. They're trying because China is producing so many things that they need peace for it. US is producing only some cars that, well, only they're driving, and a lot of weapons. So obviously they're exporting only weapons, and to export your weapons you need a war somewhere to sell them. And you have the power to start a war because you're controlling so many countries. So US is profiting from war, China is profiting from peace. I'm not saying China is good. China is not good and is probably even more evil than the US, which is very hard to measure since both countries are doing really messed up stuff. But you see which one you would pick. I would rather live in peace. I don't want war. I don't want people to die. China doesn't want war, but they want to profit for their own insane things. And China needs peace. So China is not gonna provoke some war somewhere else so they can benefit from it. They will try to calm the war down so they can sell their things to benefit from it. So until China is being provoked, we're all good. If they don't provoke China, we are fine. But if something happens in China and China starts sanctioning people, which is probably gonna be their main weapon, they're gonna use the Western tactics of we're all coming together and sanctioning you. China doesn't have to bring anyone with them. They can just say, I am sanctioning you and you're in big trouble. So we are gonna be fine until that happens. But China is most likely just gonna sit there and I don't know. They're kind of unpredictable. I don't think China is gonna engage in any military conflict anytime soon. But I feel like they will use the sanctions as their main weapon. Russia will fight with weapons, China will fight with money. So until China doesn't start firing their weapons, we're all good. If they provoke China, that's the third world war and that's gonna be a chaos. But hopefully that's not gonna happen. Just keep a lookout on China. This is the message to the Western nations. Just be close to China, be kind to China. Don't mess around with them. Russians are patient, they're really patient. I mean, it's mind-blowing how patient they are, how they didn't start just rocketing all the NATO countries because of all the horrible things they've done in Ukraine. But China is not that patient. So don't antagonize them, just be careful and we should be fine. You can't make a deal with China. You just can't. You can make deals that benefit them. They benefit from peace, so those deals you can make, but don't you cannot make a deal with them about war like you're making a deal with Russia. This is Russian and Ukrainian war is a deal. It's nothing else but a deal. They have a deal. Russia said we don't want Ukrainian weapons that you give to Ukraine to hit Russia inside of Russia. And we are not gonna use nuclear weapons on Ukraine. So there is some sort of a deal. They made some sort of a deal on the battlefield that they are both respecting, kind of, because Ukraine is still hitting Crimea, and that is Russian land since 2014, but the Western nations are saying, no, that is Ukrainian land. So they have some sort of disputes, but it's still a deal. Like it or not, they have a deal. You can't make that kind of a deal with China. China did already say years before that in case of any type of war, they would use any weapons on their disposal, which means chemical, which means nuclear, with everything, legal or illegal, they don't care. If you attack us, we'll throw bricks at you. We don't care. So don't mess with China. Leave them alone, and we'll live. Hopefully. So if you're in a country that doesn't have nukes, you can be afraid of the regional war, but if you have nukes, you're kind of safe. So should be fine, except for Israel that has nukes, but it's not gonna be safe in Israel very long, because Iran is gonna launch something in a few days, maybe a week, maybe a month. Who knows how much they're preparing? They're probably gonna try to flatten Israel completely, but we'll see. Maybe China will get involved and pat them on the head, tell them be patient, everything's gonna be fine, just ignore them. And maybe that's gonna calm down. I don't know. Turkey is kind of afraid of Israel, so maybe even Turkey is gonna get involved. Turkey is in NATO. Israel is not. So if Israel hits Turkey, the rest of NATO kind of have to jump in, but I highly doubt that US will allow it, because they're clearly all puppet states of US and UK, France, Germany, Poland, Italy, Romania, Croatia, Baltic states, all of them that are in NATO, they're all just on the US button. Just if US says we're all going to die to Ukraine, you're all packing your shit and going to Ukraine to die. If they're saying we're all ignoring Ukraine from tomorrow on, you're all ignoring them. Whatever US says, you do. So, because if they were independent and sovereign countries, they would impose sanctions on Israel years ago, because they're shelling and rocketing everybody around them and nobody's doing anything about it. And Russia started a special military operation in Ukraine. They got sanctioned instantly. Even Switzerland, that has been historically known as a neutral country, decided to join one side, the Western side, and sanction Russia. What happened to your neutrality? Well, you got under control of somebody else, and now you are doing as they say. So yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen there, but I feel like that is also controlled. It's weird because United Nations had their summit and they talked about Israel, but they're still not doing anything about it. Like, they did talk, they just do that, keep talking. They're sending help, humanitarian help to Gaza, to all those people, just feeding them so they can survive a little bit longer, so they can be killed by Israeli forces, instead of getting those people the fuck out of there. Save them. If you want to save those people, get them out of there. Don't let them be encircled and just killed every day. Like, a lot of people die there. They want to get out of there. They're surrounded. But guess who is blockading them? It's not Israeli Navy. It's US Navy right there. They're standing right here outside Gaza, and they're not letting anyone in or out. They're even blocking the UN supplies to Gaza, the whole support for them, food, medicine, water, whatever they need. Even with them, they have problems. And the whole UN is doing nothing. For example, if I was in the EU, United States is not in European Union because they're not in Europe, but if I was a leader of a country from the EU, I would suggest let's sanction Israel and somebody who's enabling them. That would be US. But you can't do it because EU is obviously owned by the US. So there is nothing you can do. And we're just watching this like it's all fine. This is not war. This is not active war. This is not aggression. It's just going to be these proxy wars where somebody's going to be making a lot of money from producing and selling weapons. And that is only one country that does that. So somebody has to put a stop to the US. And I feel like this country here that's speaking from the side is gonna do something very stupid. I don't know, but we'll see. I will let you know whenever something happens, so you'll know how bad it is or how good it is. You never know. Maybe something good's gonna happen. We kind of, since 2019, didn't really have much good happening in the world. So hopefully that's gonna be changing soon. So yeah, hope you liked the video. I'm really glad we had this little talk, and subscribe to my channel. I will keep letting you know what they're cooking while you're not looking, and I'll see you on the next one.